In this lesson, we're going to be talking about adjustment layers, how to use them, when to use them, and why they're a great thing. Stick around. What's up, Photoshop fam? I'm Rick Navarro, and this is the Pixel Laundry Photoshop Academy. Okay, so adjustment layers are this magical way of editing images in Photoshop that allows you to work non-destructively. We talk a lot about a non-destructive workflow. You're going to hear me say that a lot throughout this course, and adjustment layers are kind of the cornerstone of being able to work on a file without destructing or destroying your original image. And the reason you want to do that is because if for some reason your image that you're sourcing, if some reason your image that you're sourcing all of your information from gets corrupted or gets damaged, or you make a mistake in your edit, you need to be able to go backwards and forwards while you're editing. And I'll explain more about that in a minute. But adjustment layers make that possible for you. And they are going to be a tool that you're going to use very, very frequently throughout your Photoshop career that allows you to move very fluidly through your images. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump on in and explain it a little bit further. Okay, so the first thing we want to talk about is how do you make an adjustment layer and what does that look like? Well, first off, it is in your layers palette, okay? It operates like a layer, just like any of your other additional layers. And the way your layers palette works is it is like transparent onion skins, or if you'll remember back in the day, they used to use these transparencies or plastic sheets of paper that would be put over a light and light would shine through them and project, you know, maybe in school or in a lecture, notes that were being projected onto a screen. Layers work in the same fashion. They work as transparent layers and they work from the top down. And this is true of adjustment layers. Adjustment layers, you're going to find them in your layer palette and they are going to work just like that, just like layers from the top down. So first and foremost, you can find your adjustment layers in a couple different places. So the first place you can find them are here under the layer menu set. You'll find a few different options for your layer adjustments. Now, if you'll notice here, it says new adjustment layer. In these adjustment layers, there are certain presets that come with these layers, or the different types of adjustment layers. And here they all are. I'm going to create some notes for you guys in the show notes as well. If you need them for reference, I'm going to put them down in the show description below. But I'm going to try to explain some of these to you here as well. If I'm going to create a new adjustment layer here, I can do this like this. And when I do that, I can name it. Let's just leave it as a default for now. I've got color options that I can color coordinate them if I want in a situation where if I've got a ton of different adjustment layers and I need to organize them, I can use colors to do that right here. I can set the opacity and I can set the blend mode. We'll talk more about blend modes later. But for now, we're just going to leave this as a default. This also says use previous layer to create a clipping mask. We're going to talk about clipping masks in just a moment. But in the meantime, we're just going to leave this as a default and hit OK. And if you'll notice over here in my layers palette, again, if you don't see a layers palette on your screen, you're going to want to go to Window and Layers or F7, and it will bring up your layers palette and your adjustment layer will show up inside of your layers palette. Now, again, nothing has happened to this image because we haven't made any adjustments. But let's go ahead and take this. And if you'll notice, if you double click on it, your properties menu will come up. But if your properties menu is gone for some reason, again, you should be able to go to your window and open up properties. I like to keep that one open because it is definitely one I use very frequently, especially with adjustment layers. Every time I click on a new adjustment layer, new parameters will come up for you to make adjustments to. So I've already created a few different adjustments here prior to, just to save some time. But I wanted you to see how if you click on these other ones, there will be different properties that will come up that will allow you to adjust that. So right here, if I go and crank up the brightness, you can see that the image is adjusting. And same thing here with the contrast. Some of these adjustments are pretty self-explanatory. They're going to adjust what they say they're going to adjust. And that's basically how adjustment layers work. Or another way that you can create an adjustment layer is with these little buttons down here in your layers palette. If I delete that, if I go over here to this little black and white icon and click on that, that list should look very familiar. If you'll notice, this is the same list that was also found over here under your layer and new adjustment layer. So this list right here is identical to here. And as I mentioned in my previous lessons, I try to not cross over my image as much as possible. So when I don't have to use a hotkey or go to my menu, I'm going to create a palette or a shortcut or bring the toolbar over. Because I am right-handed, this allows me to easily access, especially if I'm using a mouse or if I'm using a stylus or if I'm working on a Wacom tablet. It allows me to easily access all my tools very quickly and on the same side. If I have them on the opposite side, then I'm constantly crossing over the screen to grab the things that I need. So I keep them here or I keep them over here on an entirely separate monitor, which you should be able to see right over there. But if I wanted to drag this off, I can grab the entire palette, and as you can see, I can drag it completely off the screen onto a different monitor. If you're fortunate enough to have a dual monitor setup, you can drag it completely off the screen. That option is available to you. So let me go ahead and reset this. So that's how you would create another adjustment layer. So if I come in here and grab a different adjustment layer, let's say a color balance, for instance, a color balance adjustment layer is going to pop up automatically in my layers palette, and I'm going to get the options in my properties palette. All right. So now let's play with this just a little bit. As you can see, there are adjustments being made to my image. Now, the beauty of adjustment layers is that these adjustments are not happening directly on the image itself, hence the need for layers and separating them out. So what's cool about this is that the adjustment layers also work on a mask-based system. So if you'll notice that there's a white box here, well, that white box is actually a mask. And if you remember from previous lessons, white reveals and black conceals. So much like a mask that you would put over your face or over your eyes, anything you cover with black is going to cover the effect that's being applied on the image. Anything that you paint in white is going to reveal it. So on this mask, if I grab a brush by hitting B for my hotkey or coming over here to my brush, notice that my foreground and background colors change to white and black. If I switch my background color to my foreground by hitting X and I paint with X, anywhere that I paint on this image, it's going to remove the effect that is currently being applied. This is an amazing function because let's say I want to apply an adjustment layer, but I don't want to apply it globally to the entire image. What do you do then? Well, I can painstakingly go around and let me go ahead and delete that mask. I can painstakingly go around the entire image and very carefully try to trace the perimeter of the image. Or there's another way, and that is called clipping mask. Okay, so for the sake of time, I've gone ahead and already made this selection. If you don't know about selections and want to check out my video on that or the lesson, which is lesson number 2, I'll put a link right here and you can check out about selections. Now, selections are amazing and they allow you to separate portions or pieces of the image that you're going to work on specifically. As you'll notice down here in the layers palette, I am working non-destructively, so I still have the original image. I like to turn it off and make copies of that image in order to make adjustments on them without destroying the original image. So this is what I have here. I have a copy of this image, a copy of this selection that I have made that's already been cut out from the background. If you don't know how to eliminate a background from an image, I have another video that you should check out. I'll also put right here. Okay, so basically what I have done here is I have made a cutout of this image, and what I want to do is have my adjustment layer only apply itself to this portion of the image and not the entire image. So how do you do that without having to paint a painstaking mask here? Well, you do that with clipping mask. And again, as the name implies, we are going to apply a mask that is clipped to a layer or attached would be another way to say that or explain that. So if I turn this layer on, actually, let's just go ahead and create a new one. And for the sake of example, I'm going to create a really exaggerated color here so you can see what's happening. So I've placed this adjustment layer above it. If I put it below it, as you can see, it shows behind. If I need it on top, then I put it above. If I hold down the Option key or Alt or Control on PC and I hover my cursor in between the two layers, I get this little drop down arrow, and what that represents is the clipping layer. So if I click on that, now you can see that my adjustment layer, my solid color adjustment layer, is attaching itself and using the layer directly under it as a mask. As opposed to painting a mask, now this is being used as the mask itself. Now, I'm using this color so you have a visual representation of what that actually looks like. But this is true with any adjustment layer that you use. So if I get rid of that, and let's just say I want a more subtle approach, something that would be a little bit more natural or more realistic to what I would use. Let's say for her, I want to put a little bit of color into the shadows. So I'm going to drop this down, drop that down, and this kind of changes the mood and the tonality of the entire picture. But right now, if I bring back the background, it's applying this globally. It's applying that blue color all the way in the background. But what if I don't want it to apply to her? What if I don't want it to apply to the background? This is where your clipping mask is going to come into play. So again, hold down Alt or Option or Control if you're on a PC, hover my mouse in between here and click, and it's going to apply that color directly towards her. Another way to do this is if I right click on the layer that I want to clip, it'll say create clipping mask, and there you go, it clips it right down to the layer directly under it. Now clipping masks are always going to work with the layer that is directly under it. Cool thing about clipping masks is that you can clip several of them to one base layer. So if I grab another clipping mask, let's just say levels for instance, I can attach that as well, and I can make adjustments that are only going to affect her and not the background. Now this is extreme, but obviously I'm just doing this for demonstration purposes. So you can see how quickly clipping masks can be very, very helpful for you. Now again, your masks are still in play here. So if I need to make local adjustments, I can do that as well. So for instance, let's say I'm going to take all of that color out on that particular mask and only apply it in a small area. I filled that with black. Remember, black conceals. So now I'm going to grab a brush. With a white brush, I'm going to paint on locally just to the area where I may want that particular adjustment layer or that particular effect to take effect or to take place. And again, I'm allowing the mask and the clipping mask now to work in conjunction with each other to get my desired effect. Okay, so let's talk about this thing called presets. Presets are predetermined settings that have been either saved in Photoshop by default or that you have created yourself. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to add a curves adjustment layer, and if you'll notice right here at the top, I've got a little option here that says preset. And right now it's set to the default preset, which is flat. It's basically taking the image as it came in. But if you hit on this drop down, you've got a few different options in here that will give you different looks that have been preset inside of Photoshop that can kind of save you some time.